Welcome everyone to This Week in Svelte episode 92, a very special one because I have my friend back for today. Enrico is with us.
Hey,
I
everybody.
Yeah, okay, they can hear you. Very excited because he will obviously co-host. He could have not, but he will also showcase something today, which I think is pretty interesting. So I'm very interested. Like in the thumbnail, we don't have an agenda yet because we decided too late which one, like which things we wanted to show. So, but you will see. You will see. You will see. Okay, so should we start with the changelog?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have a bit of a like old changelog. Like this is 2 weeks ago because last week I was not able to host. So let's start with the don't throw for undefined non-delegated event handlers. So as you may know, like event handlers now, there are two different kind of event handler. Um, there's some event handlers that basically cannot be delegated. So currently Svelte basically created just one single event handler on the top of the body, and then like every event bubble up to that body. But some events cannot be done, cannot be used that way. And if you passed an undefined event handler to those events, it was throwing, and now it's not anymore. Consistently set value to blank string when value attribute is undefined. And actually, I think like this was probably fixed, but I think like I saw an issue recently that it was not completely fixed. So I will probably also fix that in the future.
This is an interesting one. Is this about input or binding to an input value typically, where if your variable is not defined, then you may get unexpected behaviors, but now does felt force it as an empty string? What's the fix there?
Yes, I think let's actually see the thing. So previously there was an inconsistency where a value attribute wasn't set if initially undefined, resulting in the input value being a blank string. But if the value attribute was first set to a non-nullish value and then changed to undefined, then the string undefined would appear as the input value, which is bad. So, whoa, it's a very old bug. That's weird. I think, unless this was for Svelte 4?
Yeah, I'm curious about the playground reproduction, if it denotes the feature.
Because I think, yeah, it's on Svelte 3 even. Oh, that's weird. I mean, I suppose that either this was also happening on Svelte 5 or it was fixed for Svelte 4. But I think it is for Svelte. So let me go back.
Yeah, fair enough. This reminds me of some of my escapades with form values. It's cool that during advent of Svelte, this past couple of months, there was a new Svelte attribute release called default value,
Mm-hmm.
kind of inspired by other frameworks, but that allows you to server-side load some data and set an initial default value to a text input or other kinds of inputs too. And then if you want to have a bindable value, you can have your bindable value be managed client side in a separate variable from your initialized default value.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that was cool. This was also interesting because basically, given that now in Svelte 5, if you have null or undefined, we don't show the null or undefined. If you looked at the compiled code, basically there is a bunch of like nullish coalescence and stuff like that. And there was a PR from Ocean, I think, which is regularly contributing, and this is a follow-up from Rich, which basically like if there is already a logical expression like this, it means that the second part cannot be null. Like if the second part is a fallback value and cannot be null because it's a literal value, then we can remove it from the compiled code. So the compiled code was a bit shorter. This is an issue with attribute casing, Boolean attribute support, which is very weird because the browser like it's very weird about Boolean attributes, in the sense that like some attribute, for example, I think translate, it's a Boolean attribute actually, but the actual value is yes or no. So in the browser, like in the elements, you will see yes and no. But if you try to set element dot translate, you need to set it with true or false. It's very weird.
Yeah, I can imagine Svelte is doing some extra legwork for us because things like ARIA attributes are either a string of true or a string of false. But if you pass in a Boolean variable to Svelte, it'll do that translation for you to
Yeah,
get the valid string attribute in the HTML.
exactly.
Thank you, Svelte, for doing that for me. But also, I can imagine the double-edged sword here is the Svelte maintainers have to keep up with all of the non-Boolean attributes that
Oh,
sort of are
yeah.
pseudo-Booleans.
It's very annoying. This was actually something that I took a look at this PR, and it's something that I actually didn't know about HTML. But basically, if you want to use, you can use a normal, for example, link, href, and you can specify an is attribute for the browser. Like, this is not super well supported, but you can specify an is attribute and specify the name of a custom element. So I'll show you here. Basically, if you have a my element, for example, mm, let me show you the playground because it's better. Like, let's say that you have X element, which is a custom element that you have built. What you can do is you can say that this anchor tag is actually is an X link. So I think, like, from the browser perspective, this will actually be an X-link custom element. So it will invoke the connected callback from the custom element, and it will invoke every, like, when you change a prop, it will actually invoke the changed prop inside your X-link custom element. But it will be an actual anchor tag. So this is basically done for accessibility, I guess, like to ease the experience of writing accessible custom element, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I actually heard about the is attribute the other day. I double checked on Mozilla and it's not currently supported in Safari, so it is a fairly new feature that has not yet reached baseline. But I'm very curious about the behaviors because clearly the use case here is to use ordinary elements and enhance them with a custom element that has either identical or similar behavior. Like the example you shared about a anchor tag that can be enhanced to a custom element that's also an underlying anchor tag. I wonder what that looks like with things like server rendering. Does the HTML anchor tag render first, and then when JavaScript kicks in, the custom element renders second? I'm
Yeah.
very curious about those behaviors.
Yeah, I think like the behavior will probably be the same as like just like custom element, like if you define a custom element with shadow, like shadow template, I can never remember. Oh, someone is saying like is not new at all. You're right, probably is not new. I just think it's not well supported. That's why I say it. Oh, actually, it's just Safari that is.
Yeah, interestingly, you're right, chat, because it's supported since Chrome 67. So that's like years ago.
Yeah, that threw me off. Like the limited availability threw me off. But apparently, Safari does not plan to support custom built-in elements. Ah, yeah,
Okay, so maybe don't use this unless you're shipping an Electron app or something where you're guaranteed to use a supported browser.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep. But by the way, I didn't know about this attribute, so it was nice for me to learn about it. Okay, let's switch to the next release, bind focused property to HTML attribute, which also means, interestingly, that you can write to focused. This is something like you can bind a variable to focused, and if it is like if you set that variable to true, it will focus that HTML attribute. Lazily connect derives to their parent. There's a lot of work that done around derives recently because I think Dominic figured out that there was a weird issue that for unknown derived. It was weird for some specific case, specifically around untrack. Like technically, you could write to a derived inside untrack, and Svelte will not yell at you. And all of these was to like fix stuff around derived. This allows state and derived in const tags. So like the const tag, we had this issue because some people were trying to create a state or a derived within a const tag, but the const tag is already a derived. So when you create a const, in reality, it's creating a derived under the hood. So you obviously cannot use a state, and it makes no sense to use the derived. But Svelte was not yelling at you, and it was just failing at runtime. So it's nice that now Svelte is yelling at you. Improve derived connection to ownership graph. Again, this is a lot of work that has been done around derived ownership. Correctly look for sibling element inside blocks and components when pruning CSS. This is also something that has been going on for a while. And I totally understand why. Like, I did not work a lot around, like I did some work around CSS, like how Svelte interprets CSS, but like has specifically, it's wild because you can do so many things with has, and it's very difficult to statically analyze the code to figure out if it's actually used or not. So has is very difficult to deal with. And I think Simon is working a lot on CSS, but there's also other contributors that are working a lot on it. Don't prune selectors like global foo has scoped. Don't error on slot prop inside block inside other component. This was also a fun one because basically, like, just 1 second. I don't know what happened. Sorry. Okay, can you hear me, Enrico?
Yes, we're back, and the stream is running on YouTube. We're good.
Okay, sorry guys. I don't know what happened. I don't know where you lost me, but basically, I saw Enrico fading out, and I thought it was him that was having a problem. But then basically, like my internet basically died. I think I don't know, but it's fine. We are back. So I don't know where you left. Where actually I left you. I suppose.
Yeah, we left off talking about the slot prop inside the block.
Yeah,
maybe it had to do with snippet and slot interoperability. That's where you left off.
Yeah, okay. So the point is, like, a slot element can actually be a slot element. Oh, come on, sorry. I think I will fail again because now someone is calling me and I'm using my hotspot from my phone. I hope I'm not abandoning you. So element can actually exist inside custom elements, right? Like you can render a slot element. So if you were using a snippet to actually, if you were using a snippet, that's very bad. Can you still hear me? Ugh.
Yeah, you sometimes cut out. I guess your phone is being overworked.
Yeah, no, basically whenever, like, I'm using the hotspot from my phone, but someone was calling me, and when someone is calling me, it drops the internet. So I think now should be good, right? I see the stats be there. So let's back to, okay, don't error on slot props inside block. Basically, the point is, if you oh, come on, they are calling me again. Sorry. Enrico, please go ahead with the changelog so that I can answer and stop this.
I'll try my best. So let's see. Changelog. So this one's about don't error on slot prop. Okay, a slot prop is those like let colon directives in Svelte 4. So a slot prop inside of a block inside another component had an error in version 5.19.6. I see. And the details of that, trying to get the pull request. So Simon had repaired this, saying that a slot, I'm guessing it's the slot HTML element, is treated as a regular prop if it is not used directly inside another component, but we were running validations on regular props that should only be run on real slots. Okay, so I think it had to do with like a name conflict. Maybe some developers were calling their slot props literally the string slot, and some checks were not being made, but now they are. The next one is ensure reactions are correctly attached for unknown derives. Interesting. I'm not sure what an unknown derived is, but according to my research, we were not setting. There's I think that either the compiler or the runtime library had a so-called active reaction variable or function callback when processing effects and checking if they were dirty, which meant skip reaction logic was not treated unowned derives as connected, even though they should have. Okay, so maybe this had to do with derives not being defined or not being owned by their subscribers. That's my best inference here. I'm sure our resident expert, Paolo, will correct me. But it sounds like there's a lot of edge cases being caught up in version 5.19.6, so that's good news. I always like stable derives. Next one is ensure accessibility attribute warnings when spread attributes present. Oh, silence them. Okay. So I guess instead of assuming the worst, they're now assuming the best. If you have like rest props being spread onto an element, they don't make hasty assumptions about ally errors or ally validations. Next is prevent false positive ownership validations due to hot reload. Okay, so ownerships, I would assume that any shared state between different components would cause like interim state or like cache state.
I should be back.
Go
I
ahead,
don't know
Paolo.
if you can hear me, Enrico, and I don't know if anybody can hear me because apparently my internet sucks for some reason.
I hear you.
Can you hear me? Let me ask people from the chat. So please, like, raise
Yeah,
your hand if you can
chat
hear
will
me.
let us know.
So now should be good. So okay, I heard you talk about these prevent false positive ownership validation due to hot reload. So the issue there is that when you when you pass oh, the stream just ended. What? Let me check if everything sorry guys, I'm very sorry. Today is very annoying.
No, it's okay. We're live.
Okay, we are live. Okay, so basically the point is, whenever you are binding to a component, for example, we add that component to the list of owners of a specific state, and this is so that you don't get an error when you are trying to mutate that component, right? The problem arose when, due to hot reload, if you like change a component, that component is being swapped, so it's not the same instance anymore, and so it was not an owner anymore, and so you were getting like binding errors even for that. Same thing for widen ownership when calling set context. So again, a lot of works around ownership, but if you see ownership around, this is basically just for warning that only exists at dev time. So it's good. Like, it's runtime warning that only exists at dev time. So it's nothing particularly bad for production. This was also fun. Remove unused code from signal logic. There was some leftover code that was actually not used anymore. So Dominic removed it. Encounters Svelte element in blocks as sibling during pruning CSS. So probably during pruning, Svelte element was not considered like a sibling. Properly set value property of custom element. I think this is something that has to do, like, obviously custom elements are always a bit tricky and a bit weird to deal with. And I think if you try to set the value property of a custom element, let's actually see what's going on, because I read something about Simon. Yeah, okay. So basically, under the hood, since the new default value stuff that Enrico talked about before during Advent of Svelte, we basically add this slash underscore underscore value to the element, because like we want to keep track of the actual value. When you set the value of an element, it also updating the value within the input. And but this is actually how lit stores the current value of the element. And so if you are using a lit component, it was breaking things. And this was fixed by this PR. Ensure tracking returns true even if unowned. So again, derived unowned. Ensure unknown derived dependency are not duplicated when reaction are skipped. Again, unknown derived. Unknown derived, I think, like they are a bit a good performance increase, because like basically if you are unknown, if there is an unknown derived, we basically skip some work if nobody's listening to that derived. But they are a bit of a pain because every time there's some issue popping up about unknown derived. Hydrate href that is part of spread attributes. So basically href was not rehydrated back on the component. It was not corrected on the client if it was part of spread attributes. So yeah, that's it from the Svelte side. Let's see SvelteKit if there is some new stuff. Don't error during development when using usenouns with plus server as some third party. Oh, that's interesting. So basically, if you use enhance, obviously that needs to be an action inside. The actual like a plus page.server. But I think now at least it doesn't error if you use plus server. And I don't know why this clarification as some third-party libraries make it possible to post form to it. Okay, I was missing the last bit. So it's actually not erroring out automatically by doing this, because some library is actually making, I think it's Superform, allow you to actually post to a plus server TS. Skip hooks for server fetch to pre-rendered routes. Ignore non-entry point CSS file during inlining. Okay. Default server fetch to use pre-rendered paths. Okay. Validate value for cache control and content type headers in dev mode. Oh, that's interesting. So obviously cache control and content type can only be a certain kind of value, can only have a certain kind of value. And now you will get an error in dev mode if you set some value that is not actually correct. Yeah. Invalid cache control directive, totally invalid. Did you mean one of the following? That's pretty cool. Especially because I don't ever remember the cache control headers. So maybe you are like fumbling one of the, like obviously like for totally invalid, it's fine, but maybe you wrote something like max era instead of max age, and it's nice to get some error for this. Support server-side root resolution. So actually, this was merged. Cool, that's very cool. But basically, this is something that Simon did, I think. Oh gosh, why it's not opening? I hope that you're still alive. Okay. So this is pretty interesting because basically you can now do root resolution in SvelteKit. So instead of loading the whole routing manifest in the client, so this was particularly annoying for applications that have a lot of routes, for example. So if you had a lot of routes, the client would load the whole manifest every time. And this meant that obviously, like if you have a lot of roots, it's a pretty big manifest. And this also meant that you literally could not have a secret endpoint, basically. Obviously, you shouldn't do like security by obscurity, so don't do that. But the point is, instead of now going over like downloading the whole manifest and stuff like that, you can basically just root per root do the validation. So as you can see, like what this enables, project with massive roots can now use these to not send so many kilobytes up front, because the client routing manifest will no longer be sent. You can hide what root you have. That's what I was saying. Because the server is it for every root resolution, you can put things like edge middleware in front to be confident it will always be called. For example, to do rewrites, for A/B testing and stuff like that. So I saw this PR. I didn't know it was already merged. So pretty cool, because this is a pretty big new feature for SvelteKit. And obviously, as you can see, a lot of work.
Yeah, I like the performance gains on that one. Hopefully nobody was actually relying on the client-side manifest being completely exhaustively listing everything.
This like it's still behind an option. Good thing that you like, but this basically like allow you to specify that you want this behavior by specifying. Let me see if I can figure out the option. Where it is. I don't know if there is any docs already. Should be, right?
Yeah, I looked it up on svelte.dev. There is in svelte.config.js, there's a router key value pair. No, I see like path name and hash and resolution, but resolution is not.
I mean, I can probably let me see.
In the changelog, which version are we looking at?
Let me see.
Yeah, it's this one. So since 2.17.0, there's a resolution key value pair in svelte.config.js, which defaults to client, but you can override it to be server.
Yeah, that's it. Validated.kit.router.resolution. Yeah, that's it. Thanks. And let's actually bring up the actual documentation, which I suppose is in SvelteKit resolution. Yeah, that's it. So by default, SvelteKit will serve a root manifest to the browser when navigating. This manifest is used to determine which components to load and which load function to run. Alternatively, SvelteKit can determine the route on the server. This means that for every navigation to a path that has not been yet visited, the server will be asked to determine this route. So yeah, now you can do this. And I didn't know, like I have to skeet about it after we finish this. Okay, let's see. Make root resolution import root relative if paths relative option is false. Well, this was just probably a small bug in the server side resolution. Let's see other. Remove comment about adapter auto. Fix only build dependencies. Generate correct table definition for Durso in Lucia demo. Oh, update Tailwind CSS to v4. So Tailwind was released. Tailwind v4 was released, and PMPM version to 10. So now you can actually like add Tailwind v4 and get Tailwind v4 when you use SV, which is pretty cool. Update to Chokidar, generated function dedicated, blah, 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 adapter. ESLint plugin Svelte, and I think that's it. Yeah, we don't have any much more. So let's have just a small announcement. As usual, like I will bother you to infinity about this, but May 8 and 9, 2025, Svelte Summit, Spring 2025. So cool. I cannot wait to be there in Barcelona. You cannot submit a talk anymore. Like speakers already have been chosen. We will release the lineup in a few days, I suppose. Unfortunately, I will not be one of these speakers. Oh. But yeah, it's pretty cool. We will release. I mean, we already have a minimal lineup. Richard obviously will be there. Matthias from Vitcore team will be there and will do a talk. Scott and Lisk will do another talk. So pretty cool. And yep, you can. I cannot wait to see you in Barcelona. And by the way, like just to let you know, we are about to publish this, but on May 7, so the day before the conference, like I will be hosting a workshop there. So if you are booking something, please wait because we will release the workshop page soonish, and I think it's very interesting. So I want you there. Okay, we have done our duty, and so now I cannot wait to see about what Enrico has to say. So let me actually remove my screen. Wait, I cannot remove my screen, but
That's okay. I'm sure you'll find the remove button. Thank you for that changelog and Svelte Summit summary. I wish I could go this year. Maybe the next in-person meetup conference, I'll have a chance. But the cards were not in my hand. The heart of the cards were somewhere in the deck.
we will need to do another one soon because I was looking forward to see you in Barcelona.
Likewise. Well, at least virtually, I have my opportunities. So thanks for inviting me last minute to this call because I do want to showcase something that I created. So for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Enrico Sacchetti. I'm one of the ambassadors, moderators on the Svelte Discord. I also go by the eTrain on GitHub and Discord. But I created a component inspired by something called React Cartesian, and it is called Svelte Cartesian. And it goes something like this. So with my screen now being shared, I'm sure Paolo's making sure it's on YouTube just fine. If you go to github.com/theetrain/svelte-cartesian, and npm it's also known as Svelte Cartesian. This is a component that helps you with testing, specifically visual regression testing. So let's say you're building a UI library, whether it's an internal one or an expansive externally facing one. Svelte Cartesian will help you pass in your component props and then render as many combinations as possible. And then that way you could utilize a tool such as Playwright or Storybook to render all the different combinations. From those combinations, you can render a screenshot like the one I have down here. So the reason why it's called Svelte Cartesian is because it's for Svelte components, but also it takes in an array of props like these. And then the output of those props is the Cartesian product, like in mathematics. So an array of AB crossed with an array of XY will give you an array of an arrays. And this screenshot, I admit, is not very clear or indicative of the features, but I have a button here that has various sizes. And in order to render these different combinations of small buttons, large buttons, green, yellow, black buttons, to get all of these combinations to render with one declaration, Svelte Cartesian makes that easy. And I'll show you why. So let's say you already are writing visual regression testing using Playwright, for example. Normally, you would have to either loop through different combinations or handwrite the various combinations your component has. And that's a lot of work because it looks something like this. Mind you, this is a Svelte 4 example, but it does work in Svelte 5 as well. There is a Svelte 5 Cartesian component. Here you import your button, and then you have to do in each loop of the two variants your button supports. You have a variant prop, and it can pass in a value of primary or secondary. Your button has a size prop, and you have to pass in small, medium, and large. Or your button may have a prominence prop, and you want to pass in main, common, or ghost. And then this is how you render all the combinations in userland. But to simplify this, you can import Svelte Cartesian, and then here you have your Cartesian component. You can have your child, and then you can have your declaration of props. So props is one of the props Cartesian accepts, and of course it accepts component. And then what this will do is come up with the Cartesian product by passing in all the different variants your button supports. So in my button, we have variant, And it accepts either primary or secondary. We have size, which accepts small, medium, and large, and prominence. You pass in all the potential values, and then Svelte Cartesian will render all of the combinations for you. And then once you have your combinations on a page, you can then take a screenshot using something like Storybook or something like Playwright. And that's all there's to it. You can install it using your favorite package manager and import it onto the page. So since we're all using Svelte 5 nowadays, there is a Svelte 5 usage over here. And I need to release a breaking change to make that the default instead of the Svelte 4 Cartesian, but it still works. So here we have Cartesian with runes being imported. And then you pass in your children's snippet. You define your different snippet possibilities. You may have multiple snippets, but what you will need to do in your test file is write down a placeholder snippet for all the snippet possibilities you have. That way, your snippet can be passed in as an array. And it's so great that snippets can be passed in as props now, because you can now have an array of snippets in Svelte 5 for things like this, things like rendering different possibilities. Importantly, you can also add an undefined prop explicitly. So here I have primary and secondary. But if you also want to test the undefined scenario, then you would pass in primary, secondary, and comma undefined. So that way undefined gets included in all of the various combinations of the way your component can render. And there's different customization options as well. It has some built-in styles and some built-in labeling, so that when they're on the page, you can see there will be like the component will provide a label saying, these are the prop combinations for this one. These are the prop combinations for that one. You can disable the label, or you can completely customize the label using CSS variables or a custom snippet. The actual custom snippet feature for Svelte 5 is in development, but I'm working on that. And I'm trying to be careful not to release breaking changes without indicating it's a breaking change, because if I were to update this library that changes the visual regression tests of my consumers, that's a breaking change. So I will be careful to note that if something were to break in your visual regression tests, then I will release a breaking change so that it signals that to you. That's my pledge. Let's look at a Storybook example. Some of you may be using Storybook. This is how that could look. So if you're using Storybook, you define your component story like this. You have your meta, you have your meta information for the story itself, but then you have your props. So this is your userland definition of your props that you're testing. And here I'm testing a switch. So I pass the props into Cartesian, and I pass in the various props for that. And that's it. So instead of writing like a dozen tests or a dozen stories, you can write one story in Storybook and render all the different possibilities. And if you pass that into a visual regression tester, such as Chromatic or anything you like, then it too will catch those things. This is especially important when you're a component library author. You want to make sure your component renders very consistently in Firefox, Safari, and Chromium, because if you don't test for all that, you might run into issues. Like a personal example is I was using the details element, the disclosure widget, and if you don't customize the summary exactly right, on Safari, it might render a triangle, but on Chromium, it won't render that triangle. And a tool like Svelte Cartesian can help you see that early. If you want to see a Playwright example, I have one. So in the actual Svelte Cartesian repository, I'm testing, this is kind of meta, I am testing Svelte Cartesian with Playwright with Svelte Cartesian. And the way that looks is I structure my tests. This is the Svelte 4 example. So the Svelte 4, I have an end-to-end directory. And in the Svelte 4 directory, I have my source and my tests. And this is my Playwright test file. I've got the default slot. I'm testing different Cartesian features here. But the important feature to you is how do I use Cartesian in itself. Here I'm navigating to the root page. So this is a SvelteKit app. And in SvelteKit under source, roots, homepage, here I'm rendering a button, the one that makes popcorn. This is the JPEG you saw in my README. And that's it. You write your page in SvelteKit or any web framework, as long as it supports Svelte. And this way, as long as you have a rendered page on the screen, you can run Playwright against it. And that's everything. I am open for questions and comments.
Okay, can you hear me, right? At this point,
Yes, welcome back.
I'm always skeptical about my internet. I think this is pretty cool. I don't know. Do you have a hosted like storybook for this? Because it would be cool to show.
Sorry, I don't, but I should probably get on Netlify or something and just host an example.
Yeah, I think that would be very cool. But I think
Or
like
GitHub
it's pretty
pages.
clear what this library does, and I think I actually wrote that exact code that you shared with 1,000 each for storybook. So yeah, I like we actually closed that project, but that would have been like I should have used your library.
Yeah, when I developed in React 7 years ago, it's been a while. I used React Cartesian quite a bit extensively because it does make your tests a lot simpler. It's just like 3 lines of code to render one component and all of its combinations. So it's very nice. And if you introduce a new prop, then your regressions fail or your tests fail, and that's okay. You just re-review it. You make sure that the new baseline screenshot matches what your designer intended.
Yeah. I think it's pretty nice, and it's also very like it does not, for example, because one of the problem is that obviously like with these each you are also introducing a bunch of nesting. So if you have 10 props, which I mean you shouldn't in your component, but let's say that you have, it's a lot of nesting, while it's much nicer and tidy with your library. Pretty cool. Okay, so obviously, like if anybody has any question, feel free to drop them in chat. Otherwise, I think Enrico, you did have Q&A. I think we have a bit of time for at least going over the one of the question and answer that you had.
Okay, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a solid demonstration, but now would be a timely time for a discussion around testing itself. Thank you, chat. Thank you, Luke, for sharing your link in Discord, by the way. So, on the topic of testing, some of the questions that came up a bunch on Discord this past week was because I find myself in the forums pretty often, like helping out, and I noticed people are asking about where do I put my tests, or where do I put my components, or where do I put my utilities, and the short answer is it doesn't really matter. You do what makes sense to you as long as it's coherent and documented or intuitive. You want to make sure you and future you and your colleagues can easily find stuff, but that's not a great answer. So let's add some structure. Let's add some recommendations. And I think, Paolo, with your help, we can come up with at least a couple recommendations. I'll share my screen again just to get you all started. So if you're using SvelteKit, that's a great start because it already comes with a recommendation for project structure. So at the very early part of the documentation, there is a link here called project structure. And it tells you things like source, lib, routes, especially params is for param matchers if you're using spread routes. But when it comes to components and tests, typically, and I think we even had a poll on Tech Chat very recently. Typically, what you do is if you have a component or an abstraction that you want to make, where do you put it? If it corresponds to a route, like if it's proprietary, it's what I like to call them. If you have a proprietary component that only corresponds to a given route, the best place for that is in the route folder it corresponds to. So let's say you have a route called source, and then routes, and then slash profile. If you have a component just meant to be used by the profile page, then route slash profiles would have a plus page.svelte and then a sibling element called profile about.svelte or whatever it is that may be. But it lives in that directory because when you're authoring the about page, let's say you want to update it a week later or a year later, and you want to find all corresponding components for that route, it makes the most sense to co-locate it in that directory. Part of the reason why SvelteKit uses the plus character in front of the plus page.svelte is so that lexicographically or alphabetically, it is displayed at the top of your file browser and always co-located with other Svelte files so that your components and utilities can be nested right below that. So there's no like intermingling of what is a SvelteKit file, what is a personal file or a project file. So lean into that feature is what I recommend. And then finally, if you have a component used in 2 or 3 or more routes, then you can use the lib directory. Some people use lib, some people use lib/components, some people use source/components, and they add the components folder to their aliases. So you can have an alias like $components leading to there. That's all personal preference. I'm not going to push anyone either way, but it only makes the most sense to use those when they're highly reusable. And then there's a different elephant in the room, like when do you abstract components? I won't get into that right now, but just at a basic level, that's how you would structure your routes and components. Before I get into tests, I'll let Paolo have a go.
Yeah, for example, one thing like this, for example, is one of the reasons why I love the SvelteKit router. I know it has been a bit of controversial. Like people don't like that every file is named plus page.svelte, but I actually love the fact that every like you have a plus page.svelte. I love the plus before page because this means that, like as you've said, it will float to the top, and also it's very easy to determine what is an actual component and what is a root. And personally, like with the tooling that we have today, like for example in VS Code, if I want to access a root, I can just go plus page.svelte and then literally write the root name in the search bar, and it will pop up the list of the roots that start with that thing. So I really love the thing. I think this is one of the things that sold me more on Svelte at all. Like the fact that all these thought were put into the SvelteKit router was something that I said, okay, like those people really know what they are doing. And so that's why I went really into Svelte. And so, yeah, I completely agree with you. I would also add that this is a super personal opinion, so I don't know. I might offend you, but for example, I love to write my forms literally in my plus page.svelte. Like I've seen a lot of people trying to abstract their form in a separate component, but instead I really love to write my forms in my plus page.svelte, because at the end of the day, like if you're using form actions, that form will also come with a plus page.server.ts action. So I want to see my form so that I can see which kind of inputs I have in that form so that I could use them inside my plus page.server.ts. So I think, at least for me, it's very therapeutic to just open the plus page.svelte, look at all my fields and see, okay, I know that I can access the name, and then switch back to the plus page.server.ts. Back to you for testing, because I mean, I want you to lead to pave the way.
No, that's actually a good opinion. I agree with you. I like verbose pages. I like it when everything is clear, and even though you might have a plus page that's 500 or even 800 lines of code. Um, you might have the temptation for dry programming. You may want to abstract as much as possible to clean it all up, but clean isn't necessarily clear. And that's why having a verbose page has several benefits. One, it's easily abstractable when you need to do that. Two, it's highly refactorable if the requirements or the design changes for that page. And if you have an immature product or one that hasn't stabilized, you'll thank yourself for having a verbose page that's highly refactorable versus one that's abstracted into 10 different components, because then you'll find yourself editing 10 files at a time just for what could have been a single quick win or a single ticket for your given work. So yeah, I do like the idea of verbose pages, especially for form management. So the form example makes the most sense to me because the form corresponds to the exact same routes named actions, and you want your use enhance to be on that page rather than having to fiddle with make an abstracted form, passing in the enhance call, and then making sure it is applied using the use directive. So yeah, the use directive is kind of constrained in a way. It doesn't, you can't pass it in as a prop. So you have to invent your own prop just to make that work. And I guess Paolo and I agree, avoid the problem altogether. Keep the form on your page.
Okay, so I mean, let's talk also about tests.
So I guess I'll press on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tests. If you start a SvelteKit project, by default, you can agree to opt into installing vtest and playwright. And by design, it is recommended to use a tests directory here. Personally, I like to split up tests between end-to-end tests and unit tests. So I do customize my projects a bit to be like tests E2E and tests unit. But having a single test folder is totally fine if you don't mind commingling some of your configurations. But the point really is just a separation of visual overload. So in your tests directory, what I do is if I have a file called source lib utils.js, I would also have a test/lib/utils.test.js. So in the test directory, I put my tests in there, and I also have matching directories that correspond to the source. So if there's a source lib, I also have a tests lib. If there's a source lib server, I have a tests lib server. And then in there, I have corresponding files. Mind you, it's perfectly acceptable to have your tests file live in source, because as long as your pages or your components or utilities aren't importing test files, those test files do not get built into your production build, and they don't get shipped to production. So you don't have to worry about bloat if you co-locate the files, because the ESM resolver used by Vite will ensure that those either get tree shaken or eliminated completely because they're not being imported anywhere. So it's okay if they live in those directories, except of course static. Anything in static gets shipped as is. So it doesn't make sense to put test files in theirs, of course.
Yeah. And I do agree. And by the way, I think we should update this page probably, because if you use SV now, at least from my latest, like if I remember correctly, like it come with an end-to-end folder for end-to-end tests. So like it's actually following your suggestions of separating end-to-end test and unit test for that. And I have to say that I do love to have my unit test next to the file where the function is defined. I like it. So like as in your example, like if you have a source lib utils.ts with some util function and I want to unit test that, I will just create a utils.test.ts where I can import that file and like do the same thing. But that said, I also like the test, like matching your source folder inside the test folder for vtest too. What I do generally is in my end-to-end test, I also match my roots folders. So the manual, which is one of the maintainer of SV, is actually saying that there is a PR pending for SV that will also allow component testing via testing library and vtest soon. Forgot to publish it later, so earlier. So it's actually coming also component testing with testing library and vtest. And by the way, I'm also exploring a bit. You might have seen, like I know Enrico that you had. I'm also exploring a bit the idea of testing your Svelte component in a .test.svelte file. So you write your module, you write your test in your module, and then you can use the template of the Svelte file to actually build your snippets, for example, without using create row snippets and stuff like that. And I have to say that I kind of like it. I'm waiting to like, hey, use these, because in vtest browser mode, importing self will mean a bit of a weird thing. Like it will run the test twice basically, but it's pretty nice. So importing this test file and rendering that test file instead of the button, so that you can assert stuff on it. And I think it works, and it's nice. I would use it. But yeah, for the moment, I'm still trying to figure out if vtest browser mode it's actually fixable, because I opened an issue on vtest browser and they say like they understood why it happens, but also they don't know how to fix it. So I might have to spend some time trying to figure out if I can fix it. Okay.
Well, that works for me. There are lots of valid approaches for these.
Yeah. Okay, that was it, I think. Enrico, thank you for joining, and I hope that you can join me more often. I know you are trying to, so let's see. And thank you for showing the Svelte Cartesian thing. And sorry everybody for my spotty internet and my like weird stuff. So I hope that you can understand. I live in a countryside. But thank you very much. I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoyed this week in Svelte. See you next week.